Morning, everyone. It's Carrie, aka Nerdy Girl Crates, and I am here with my friend Gabe, and we are going to be talking My Hero Academia. Gabe, you want to introduce yourself to everybody? Let them know who you are.
Yeah, hi.
And we.
Yeah, I got to pause. There's an echo there, so I got to wait for that to catch up just for a second.
Okay.
Let me see if that's me or if that's you. Yeah, hi. I'm Gabe Hernandez. Oh yeah. I'm hearing a different voice in my head, so I gotta wait for that to catch up. Give me 1 second.
Sure. Looks like Gabe's having some technical issues. Hopefully he'll be back on soon. It's been my week for technical issues. I mean, I think it started with Comic Aficionados, and then it's just been like going on and on lately. I don't know if it's my internet here or what. Yeah, so today we're going to talk about My Hero Academia. We're going to talk about the manga. So just a heads up, they will be spoilers. So if you're not caught up on the manga, just to let you know, you might want to tune out now and come back and watch this later. But we will be talking about some different things, including like Western comic influence on My Hero Academia, character development, which is something we don't get too much anymore in Western comics, villains, and also the consequences, which we'll get into later. But if you're not familiar with My Hero Academia focuses on the main character, Midori, and I do apologize if I say words wrong. I'm still trying to learn, but he's also known as Deku, and we're going to use Deku as his name throughout this. He is a kid who's born into a world where there is absolutely everyone has superpowers. Think X-Men, but everybody's mutants except for a rare few. And unfortunately for Deku, he's one of the few who doesn't have superpowers. However, he is always dreaming about being a superhero. And he's determined to be one, even though everybody puts him down for not having any powers. And in this manga, powers are known as quirk. Gabe is back. Hi.
I'm back. Yeah, just a little Saturday morning hiccup. Everything sounds much better now. Much better.
Okay. I was just giving them a brief synopsis of the manga, what it's about for those who might not know. And Deku comes across his favorite superhero of all time, All Might, and All Might has the ability to pass on the power. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Again, I'm going to let Gabe introduce himself now that the technical issues are worked out.
Yeah, sorry about that. So I'm Gabe Hernandez. I'm the publisher and editor-in-chief for comicalopinions.com. I'm also a review contributor for Weird Science DC and for Weird Science Marvel. And as you'll find out in a couple hours, I'm also an occasional guest on the Comic Aficionados webcast as well. So it's a streamy kind of Saturday morning. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me, Carrie.
Yes, and check out Thinking Critical later at 10 o'clock today. Also, so My Hero Academia, you and I, Gabe, are both longtime comic book fans. And
yes.
What we like about My Hero Academia is it's a superhero story that's heavily influenced by Marvel and DC Comics.
Yep.
The creator, Kohei, and I again apologize if I say this wrong, Horikoshi, admits that his characters are very much influenced by Spider-Man, even going as far as paying homage to one of the covers of Ultimate Spider-Man, with Volume 9 of My Hero Academia.
Mhm.
He's also had silhouettes of Spider-Man, Wolverine, and Superman featured alongside some famous Japanese characters such as Kamen Rider in some panels within the manga. So, Gabe, what do you think are some of the other influences from American comics that you've seen in My Hero Academia?
Well, if we look at the story and the structure of how the world is created, how the world is constructed, as far as
Mhm.
people being born with quirks, I mean, you could easily draw that the connection or the parallels to mutants and the X-Men from Marvel, right?
Right.
So you have individuals that are born with very unique powers. Some of them are very strange. Some of them are seem impractical. Whatever the case may be. The only difference is in this world, it's about 80% of the population that are born with quirks instead of
Right.
we'll calling them mutants. So it's very it seems very similar to Marvel's mutant mythology, but it's sort of reverse in that mutations are normal, and the people that are born without mutations are the outcasts, or they're picked on, or they're looked down upon. So there's definitely that X-Men mutant Marvel connection as well. As far as the
Yes.
story structure of the main character, whose name is Deku, or it's called Deku. That's not Midoriya is his full
Yeah.
name, but they call him Deku. The It's very much the kind of the whole concept of the hero's journey, where
Mhm.
he has an idea of what he wants to be in his head. And from every aspect of how the world looks at him, he's the underdog. He's born without powers. He's maybe slightly small for his age, maybe, depending on your point of view. Even his nickname means useless. Deku is
Mhm.
translated as useless. So, in many respects, he personifies everything that you would consider to be the quintessential or the prototypical underdog, and then that goes from there. So to draw that connection back over to Spider-Man, where you have Peter Parker, the mousy, nerdy teenager that gets picked on by Flash Thompson and all the cool kids in school, and all of a sudden this power is thrust on him. And in that way, they're different. Where Deku wanted to be the hero, where Peter Parker just sort of was given the responsibility. Great power comes with great responsibility, but in many ways they're coming from that same place of being just sort of meek, mild, powerless, and weak, now
Mhm.
having this power and then feeling the responsibility of trying to make the most of it.
Right.
How's that for a short answer?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah.
And also you can, argue with All Might, he's pretty much influenced by Superman.
Yep.
He is this, positive role model who is, determined to do right, and he's got all this strength, but he takes it seriously, he doesn't abuse his powers,
Hmm.
he wants to be there for everyone, he puts everybody before him. Uh,
With the smile.
yeah,
With the
with the
smile.
smile, always with the smile. He always hides his fear behind his smile. And, it's also nice seeing, like, this relationship between Deku and All Might of a mentor and,
Hmm.
a new person coming into the world of superheroes. It's kind of like Professor X with the X-Men,
Yep.
but instead it's Superman.
It is, and also for fans who are MCU movie fans, the relationship has a lot of similarities between Peter Parker and Tony Stark from the movies, where Tony
Yes,
Stark is the seasoned character. He's been in the heat of battle. He has that world experience, and he has all the power and technology and everything along with it. And he kind of treats, as Tony Stark treats Peter Parker sort of like as a nephew or a son. All Might also treats Deku kind of like the son he never had in the same respects. So the
correct.
parallels of the relationships are very similar.
And then you have Bakugou, who
Hmm.
is like your typical bully, and when you first start off with the manga, you think he's gonna be set up to be the, antagonist to Deku's protagonist, but there's some interesting development there if you wanna go into that.
Sure. As you have to jump way forward in My Academia to kind of get to the place where essentially
Mhm.
they develop a sort of level of respect for each other. It's not friendship per se, but it's an understanding that um, they're both trying to be heroes. They're just both trying to be the best, and they both have a reverence for All Might, but they
Mhm.
go about expressing that reverence in very different ways. So Deku is more like, I want to be like you. I look up to you, All Might. You're my model. You're my role model. I want to be you someday.
Right.
And Deku similar, but in more in the sense of a competitive nature, where he wants to be All Might, but he wants to be better than All Might. He wants to
Right.
exceed what All Might's accomplished, and when so at the same so even though they both look up to All Might in a way, uh, Bakugo looks at Deku as his competition to be the best, to be
Right.
better. The parallels again, it's so many parallels in MHA, and it's kind of hard to avoid. It's very much like how the relationship developed between Goku and Vegeta from Dragon Ball, where
Mhm.
one was sort of considered sort of the not sort of he definitely was the villain in the beginning, and
Mhm.
then one is the lighthearted optimist for in Goku, just trying to be the best and trying to be the best you could be. But over time, they developed a sort of respectful relationship with each other. Not quite friends, but at least enough that they could work together and they can move forward towards their common goals. And so it borrows heavily from that relationship as well.
Right, and for a while there, even Bakugo goes as far as to keep Deku's secret
Hmm.
and not let anybody know about it, which you wouldn't expect. You would think he would have used that as an opportunity to help himself, but he doesn't. And
Uh,
I think it's also because of his respect for All Might.
it's his respect for All Might, but I also think there's a piece of that where if he were to give away Deku's secret, just to kind of put him down, it would almost be like he's cheating himself out of his rival.
Mhm.
So even though they're friends, they're rivals at the same time. And if he had exposed them and that somehow created a negative environment for Deku where he couldn't continue as a hero or he couldn't continue in MHA or couldn't continue in the program, then it's like, well, now I'm taking my rival away and I have nobody to compete against. So in a way, it would be hurting him, would be hurting himself. And he sees that as a cheat almost.
Right.
Yep.
And getting into character development, with Bakugo, you see him when the manga starts off, he's kinda like the big fish in the little pond. Everybody's
Hmm.
telling him he's great, he's got the best quirk, he's gonna be the next number 1 hero, but then as he gets into UA, he starts to realize that maybe he isn't as great as he thinks he is. He comes across Deku now having powers that might
Hmm.
best his. He's got Shoto, who seems like he might even be better than him, and I think it kinda, like, rocks him a bit into reality.
Yeah, I think Shoto in particular, I think really gets it because, or like kind of brings that out in him because part of Shoto's power is he's fire and ice, right?
Mhm.
So with the fire side of it, it has a lot of similarities to Bakugo's own power. So now he has a different sense of competition from somebody that right from the get go almost seems like he's ahead and he's superior to him, and that's really what gets under Bakugo's skin is he can't stand somebody being ahead of him
Yes.
as much as he loves All Might and or loves him in his own way and wants to compete and wants to excel and wants to be as good or if not better, he can't stand that anybody's in that race ahead of him, and that's what
Right.
gets under his skin. One of the things I wish the image that My Hero Academia would do is we've seen snippets of it, but we haven't seen really like in depth, long character development with Bakugo's family. We've
Right.
seen little bits here and there, and I wish they would touch on that more. And the bits we've seen is just basically everybody shouting at each other. So it's a very loud, screechy, kind of noisy environment.
You know where he gets it from.
You know where he gets it from, so it's no surprise he turned out the way he did. But I wish they would dig into that a little bit more to help
Mhm.
us understand how kind of what drives him and how the pieces that we've seen from him as a small boy, where he developed that admiration for All Might and where he began to develop a sort of a hateful competition. It wasn't a friendly competition, just sort of like a bullying competition with Deku. Is really that it was just through that relationship. It wasn't through his family. It was through his younger
Right.
years growing up with Deku. And I wish he would explore the family a little bit more. But the pieces we get, they're just yelling and screaming at each other. So there's no surprise whatsoever that he turned out the way he did at all.
Yeah, and I think his relationship with Deco took a turn when they were younger, when Deco came to rescue him that time, and he kinda
Mhm.
didn't like the idea that Deco had to save him. So that's what I
Yep.
think the bullying started because it was just like it reminded him that he can be weak.
That he can be weak, and that in particular Deku, who had no powers at that time,
Mhm.
was somehow able to get one over on him. So
Right.
it amplified that level of sort of shame is what he feels, and that's shame is that's a very kind of a Japanese cultural type of thing. Not feeling shame, not feeling weak, not feeling like you've missed an opportunity or did something wrong. Uh, Plays on that heavily. He's like, so you've got this norm where he has no power. He's actually the minority of the planet, and yet he was able to come along and save me. And so how weak am I that somebody like this, who's a shrimp and with no power, can get one over on me? It irks him to his very core. And they to the author's credit, he uses that to the extreme and very effectively.
Yeah, and I think also with Bakugou, he puts on this tough act, but
Mhm.
I think still he knows right from wrong, and his teammates soon discover, like, he does have a sense of justice, that he will save everybody on the team, and there's even a point where he kinda looks at them like, "Trust me, I will get everybody out of here."
Mhm.
And it's interesting because everybody thinks, "Oh, he's just gonna be a jerk, he's only here for himself." But I think he also realizes it's important to have a team without coming out and saying it.
Yeah, that's true. And that's sort of what makes him interesting, is because he does have a moral code, a moral
Mhm,
compass, a sense of justice, and of wanting to be a hero. But there's definitely a patina of selfishness about it. In
mhm.
some ways, that makes him more similar to Endeavor than All
Yes.
Might, because Endeavor kind of has that same relationship with All Might, where Endeavor always wanted to be the best, but he saw being the best the, uh, the through maximizing his power,
Right.
through being the best of just kind of wanting to be more powerful than everybody else. And so that's just sort of like a tilted, or not, I won't say corrupt, but just an off kilter understanding of the kind of the core mentality of what it means to be a hero. And so, in that same respect, even though he wants to be like All Might and better than All Might, the way he conducts himself is actually closer to Endeavor, but which again is another parallel between the relationship between Endeavor and All Might. So
Yes.
many parallels in how these things play out, but it pieces together beautifully.
Now, another thing My Hero Academia does that I think is sorely missing in Western comics, especially with new characters, is the hero's journey.
Mhm.
And Deco definitely goes on a hero's journey. I mean,
Yep.
even at this point, he's still developing. He's not just granted the powers and runs with it. He's got to first earn the powers by developing his body.
Yep.
Then, when he gets the powers, he's got to learn to use it. And it's not an easy task, as we see.
Yep.
He literally breaks his body apart, but he
Mhm.
still has All Might in his corner, always encouraging him to keep going and that he believes in him, which is something is nice to see. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it is nice. So if we're talking about like writing and writing stories and just in
Yes.
general, right? Uh, I'm one of the people that ascribes to the seven basic plot structures. And there's like, the quest, the monster, the saving the innocent, and what, there's I don't remember them all off the top of my head. I have to go back and look it up. But these stories
Mhm,
are definitely quest stories, and the quest starts with the main character, who's typically an underdog, and he has a goal in mind, and the goal is seemingly impossible.
mhm,
And if you go look at the more popular Shonen Jump kind of category of manga that does so well and is so very popular, that it fits so well within that same space, My Hero Academia, Naruto, uh, Bleach to a certain degree, uh,
mhm.
uh, Black Clover, even sort of Kaiju number eight, etc., etc. You're all starting with this main character who's kind of a schlub, or he's back afield. He's very far away from being anything that anybody in the world around him would consider a hero.
Right.
Uh, Black Clover is a perfect example. The main character Halsta has no magic whatsoever in a world where everybody has magic. It's almost the same thing. And so what gets everybody, I think, on board with these hero journeys type stories is you're starting with a character who's an underdog, but they have a goal in mind that is seemingly impossible, and yet they're so determined to overcome their own limitations and the limitations of the world around them that you just can't help rooting for them. That you want to get on their side, that you want to get behind them, and as long as they kind of stick on that path and just fight to overcome, and sometimes they lose, and that's even makes it better because it makes them more relatable. People people love characters when they can relate to them emotionally. And so I think everybody understands the concept of an underdog as somebody who wants something that maybe is way beyond their grasp of what they can attain, but they
Mhm,
fight and they get it no matter what. Now they may never get there, as we see in the case of My Hero Academia. Him he may have the power of All Might, but he's not that level yet. Even though you
No.
hear like in the narration for the opening credits, he will eventually become the world's greatest hero, but we haven't gotten to that point yet. But you're so invested in seeing him succeed that you almost kind of want to get behind him and help him. Every time he falls down, you just want to get behind him and help him up
Yes.
because
Yeah.
you know he's on the right path. And so when you see all these stories and they all fit so well, it's all because they choose that very similar model of starting with a character who wants not selfish greatness, but to achieve something great that's going to benefit not only them but the whole world in many respects, because they're great because they want it for the right reasons and they're doing it for the
Mhm.
right they're doing it the right way. So when you see them get on their journey, you immediately like them. You immediately want to support through their challenges. And so when they win, you get that sort of um, emotional kind of endorphin hit of we won. It's sort of like rooting for your own sports team. Say you have the worst sports team in the world, but they keep trying, they keep doing their thing. The Detroit Lions. Sorry if you're a Lions fan, but that's the way it is. Say Detroit Lions, when they kind of get it together and they fight and they fight and they fight and they fight, and against all odds they make it, you're part of that experience. And
Yeah.
if we translate that into the kind of the modern Western comics of DC and Marvel, that kind of character structure and development and growth is just almost entirely absent. You're not going to
Right.
find that anywhere. Not definitely not in Marvel DC. You might find that in other smaller
Right.
publishers or somebody trying to build something on their own. But in Marvel DC, you just don't see that anymore. I mean,
No.
even if you look at new characters that have come out recently, say Monkey Prince. Monkey Prince just came out from DC Comics. Reviewed that it was okay, but it was kind of slapdash. It was kind of ho hum. Didn't show you anything new, and there was really nothing special about the character. He didn't have that sense of determination to do right. That's not to say he was a bad character. It's just nothing to emotionally connect to. And
Right.
if you had a pin right now, the only thing that you can emotionally connect to with Marvel and DC is anger at some of the stupid decisions they make. But that's for completely different reasons altogether, and how they develop their characters.
This is true. Cake on the Roof asks, who are your two favorite characters?
Is that for me or for you?
For both of us.
I mean, Deku, of course. But I forget his name. What's off the top of my head? The one with the black bird head. What's his name?
Oh, yeah. I just want
The one who has the dark presence.
Fukuyami.
Yes, yes. I like him a lot, just because there's a certain sort of, you know, just like a laid back cool about him. It's like
Mhm.
I know I look like a hideous monster, but I'm just one of the gang, and everybody loves it, and I love them, and that's okay with me. There's just like a sort of quiet confidence about him that I really enjoy, beyond Deku as well.
Yeah, I would say I like Deku and I like Shoto because of his whole background with his family dynamic, which
Hmm.
was what I wanted to get into next with Endeavor. As you were saying earlier, his goal is to be the number one hero, and his family is more of a tool for him to achieve that than it is a family relationship. But that consequence has a bad effect on not just Shoto, but another character who later on we discover how twisted he became because of
That's a
Endeavor.
spoiler. That's a spoiler. You can't
Yeah.
give that one away. Um, I'm not going to spoil it for anybody who's in the stream, but just suffice to say that there's a character, a villain that comes along that is associated with his
Mhm.
background as well. Um, yeah, I really like Shoto a lot. I like Endeavor. I like that the whole background there. Not because it's a good back. It's definitely not. It's very much a kind of abusive,
Yeah.
toxic relationship. The whole concept is what we talked about earlier is Endeavor wants to be the best, but his concept of being the best is through strength and power.
Right.
Uh, Sometimes at the detriment of doing what's right for those around him who are weaker or innocent or whatever the case may be. And so, in a way, Endeavor becomes a cautionary tale for Bakugou because he's on that same path.
Right.
But through his relationship with Deku, he's softened up a little bit and he's brought that back a little bit. So it's every chance that Deku would become just like Endeavor, but the better version of Endeavor. And
Mhm.
so that whole family dynamic, which is very troubling, and this abuse and all kinds of things, especially with his mom and how he got the scar. How shows you got the scar on his face and everything else. That family relationship is actually the one that's built out, I think, fleshed out the most in the series so far,
Yes.
and also had the most impact on everything that's going on around them because it was fleshed out and so important. So definitely makes a sense for an interesting character. It also gives an opportunity to, even though we're seeing that now with Oyama, if I'm saying that right, Oyama, a redemption arc for
Mhm.
trying to make amends and trying to set things right for past mistakes.
Yeah, and I know you were talking about, like, Bakugo and Deku's relationship, but I also think Shoto balances out Bakugo later on too when they're
Yeah.
forced to team up because, Shoto has kind of been sheltered from personal relationships,
Hmm.
and you'll see some funny moments where things are said and he just kinda looks at them baffled, like, "I don't know what you're talking about, what do you mean? They're gonna die because of me?" And everybody's like, "That's not what it means." But, with Bakugo, you've got the hothead, and then Shoto, even though he's fire and ice, he seems to be far more cooler as time goes on and more level-headed,
Hmm.
and Bakugo always gets annoyed with him, but he just brushes it off with Shoto just brushes it off with Bakugo.
Yeah, and I think there's a, again, yeah, what we were talking about earlier, where right as soon as they start school, Shoto is
Mhm,
seen as the top of the top
mhm.
because in particular his ice power is so powerful that he can, basically encase an entire stadium worth of people once they get to the sports uh, sports competition, um, competing against the different grades. He's seen basically as the one to beat, and
Mhm.
so right off the bat, that kind of irks Bakugou because he wants to be the best. And I think there's also a part of it as well where Bakugou's power, even though it's different, it's sweat induced explosions or explosions that come from his sweat. There is a kind of a fiery element to it. So I think when Shotu not only shows a dominance of ice by being able to just encase people and create all kinds of destruction, that he can be almost as equally powerful with fire. And I think there's a little bit of that where Bakugo is saying, "Hey, wait, fire's my territory.
Yeah,
Explosions and making things burn, and that's my territory. You're not allowed to have that. You got your own power. Stick to ice. You stick to ice and just leave me alone." And so he's
right.
just like, not only do I have ice, now I have fire. So I'm doubly better than you, Bakugo. And I think again that just kind of gets under his skin. So yeah, it's good to see that they also develop a little bit of that respectful relationship as time goes by, and part of that is drawn out or brought out by necessity because they're being hunted by villains who want to kill them or destroy them or do whatever it takes to kind of bring them down. So they sort of became comrades in arms, if you will, through the heat of
Yeah.
battle. So that's a very interesting relationship as well.
And speaking of villains, you have some interesting villains in this as well. Of course, the one everybody knows about is, I think it's One for All, or
Yeah,
that's
it's all for
yeah,
one and one for
All
all.
for One. Yeah,
Yeah, all yeah. So the way you look at that is, all for one is the villain because he takes everybody else and brings it into himself.
right.
As far as for all is taking what he has won and using it for everybody else. All.
Yeah, so his main goal is just ultimate power.
Hmm.
And then you have Shigaraki, who is like Shoto, um, his past is abusive because he was not accepted by his father.
Hmm.
And it had a different drive in him than it did with Shoto
Hmm.
because it just led him down this dark path. And he ends up becoming mentored by All for One, which is not the right type of mentor you want for somebody like that.
Yep. Um, what's interesting about the world that the author has created is it's very much surrounded by sort of classism. Maybe the word of it is based upon power sets, their quirks. So in the very, very beginning, Shigaraki's family kind of had a his father could not accept him because at the very, very beginning, I think he didn't he bloomed late in displaying his
Mhm,
quirk. So his father didn't accept him because he thought he was quirkless. And he's like, "Well, you're just an average guy. Don't have much to you. What's your value if you don't have any quirks?" Then, unfortunately, once he developed the quirk, it was so devastatingly uncontrollable and destructive that it just messed him up in the head. And I think
mhm.
that's a good opportunity to kind of look at how the influence of the society around how people view quirks as a sort of class system creates a detrimental effect on children.
Right.
Now, I don't know if the author was trying to say something about just classism in general and what that means to bring up children in a healthy way. But you can definitely see, again, another parallel where there's societal pressure creates unhealthy relationships within families.
Right. And I know with Shigaraki, his father also had his own trauma,
Hmm.
which we won't reveal right now. That'll, for those who
That's,
are reading the
that's,
manga.
yeah, that's a spoiler one. We're not going to touch on that one.
Yeah. And now some of the other villains, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about Marvel DC influences. Twice, in my
Hmm.
opinion, is pretty much like the Deadpool of My Hero Academia. It's
Yep.
kind of a little bit Moon Knight, a little bit Deadpool.
A little bit Moon Knight, a little bit Deadpool, and I mean, for anybody who doesn't know who that character is he's multiple man.
Hmm.
Right, so he can just split himself off twice, 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 and he just creates multiples of himself. But the problem is, and I think where My Hero Academia actually handles that power set better, is that the character gets lost on who he is because he doesn't know which of him is the real one.
Right.
And so that eventually creates a mental break, and he has to do things like put a mask on to kind of remember I'm the real one, and do some other things to kind of keep his mentality in check. But yeah, I think that one's interesting as well. He's not Deadpool in the sense that he doesn't really break the fourth wall much, or I don't think he even breaks the fourth wall at all.
I think he breaks
Uh,
it with himself. Like he
yeah, he
gets in
breaks it with,
arguments with his characters.
yeah, but what it does is it creates a kind of some uncomfortable comic relief with the people, with the other villains around him, because he's like starts talking to himself, he starts having arguments with himself, he starts treating people differently in different ways, and it creates a sort of everybody looking at him like, what the heck is up with this guy? So yeah, so there's definitely opportunities for comic relief with that character, but as you see how much that mentality affects him, and again, another way where I think manga tends to get it over Western comics is the author puts emotional depth into his character.
Hmm.
He's truly, I don't say traumatized is not, maybe not the word, but he's disturbed about his loss of identity
Yes.
because he's split so many times and things have happened. He doesn't know who's the real one. He sort of doesn't even know if he's real anymore. And
Right.
and rather than just kind of making that a running gag or a joke, he takes that and builds true trauma into that character. So
Hmm.
at a certain point, you kind of feel for the guy because he's like lost in himself and he doesn't know what to do with it. And people are just like, You're part of you're part of the plan, the big plan. You're part of the plan and you're instrumental to it, but you got to hold it together." Because if you start falling apart, you're going to ruin the plan. And so that, yeah, there's a lot of that in there. It's very um, emotionally, it's more emotionally complex than I think most people would give it credit for.
Right. And I think he does a nice job, the author, of creating villains with some sympathetic level, but not excusing their actions.
Right.
Because sometimes I feel like in Western comics, they're trying to make villains more heroic to the point you're feeling so bad for them you don't want the hero to take them down.
Yeah, I mean, this came up recently with a couple things. So if we're talking like Western comics, for example, Newbie the Amazons is just about to wrap up before it goes into trial on the Amazons on the DC side of things. But the whole most of the arc of Nubia and the Amazons is sort of justifying Medusa as more of a victim rather than a
Mm.
villain. Now you can play with the mythology and there is some room for interpretation in there, but it's like I don't think anybody in modern era has ever thought of Medusa as just a victim who was wrongfully, done dirty, kind of thing. Another circumstance is, actually a series that's doing sort of well is Deathstroke Inc.
Hmm.
When I was growing up, Deathstroke was not a nice person.
No.
he was a mercenary for hire, and he would kill anybody and anything for the right price. And so all of a sudden, to turn around is like, well, he's not all bad, and you sort of start to instill sympathy in them just because they want to change the nature of the character. Now, I have no problem with characters evolving, but at the same time, where I think MHA does it better is the characters are generally coming from a place of tragedy or
Hmm.
trauma, or the nature of their quirk just was too much for a little kid to handle, basically.
Yeah.
um, so and they just dealt with it the way they could dealt with it. Now, the way they dealt with it usually now for the villains went in a very wrong and different direction. And so rather than trying to say, well, now they're not bad, it's like, no, no, they're still pretty bad. It's just, but now you understand why they're bad. So you
Right.
can you get the essence of the character. That doesn't make it right, doesn't excuse it, and they're not about the change necessarily. But at the same time, you're not going to sit there and start changing the character to kind of to make them more popular. They're not
Correct.
there about making popular. They're about taking their pain and either taking it out on somebody else or doing something wrong to make their pain go away.
And speaking of that, you have another villain named Toga, and she is really messed up.
Yep.
Yeah, her whole quirk is taking the blood from other quirk users and duplicating that, and then also turning into them.
Yep. But it didn't
And
start out that way.
no,
That was an evolution. At first, it was take the blood and then you can kind of develop their physical appearance. Then
yes,
eventually turned into after stress and pressure and everything else turned into where you not only can mimic their appearance but briefly mimic their powers.
yes,
And I think that's also another thing that MHA does in the superhero genre, even though it's manga, that it does much better um, than Western comics, especially if you're talking about mutant kind, is the characters learn to develop and hone, in some cases, evolve their powers.
hmm
So that's a perfect example where in the beginning she'd take the blood, and then by consuming the blood, she just looked like that person. So it's
hmm
sort of chameleon type power. But then it eventually turned into through pressure and stress and training and everything else, where she could now duplicate their powers, which is not something she started off with. You don't see that with the X-Men. Right, Jean
hmm
Grey is Jean Grey, Wolverine is Wolverine, Iceman is Iceman, and the sort of the power that they had is the power they stuck with. I think Iceman might have been the only one that maybe sort of evolved because in the beginning his ice appearance was just like a shell, but there was a brief period of time, I think in the 80s on, and maybe he still is, where he can convert his whole body into ice, like
hmm
all the way through. That might be the one example, but by and large, you never really see anybody's powers evolve or develop, or they don't push them, and
no,
there's no growth of what they can do. And I think
exactly.
that's something that kind of contributes to a feeling of stagnation with the Western comics. Now, Batman is Batman. I mean, there's only so much you can do with that because he's just a man. But at the same time, with the others, you never get a sense that they're training, they're evolving, they're trying to become more, they're trying to become better. It's just sort of like this is who we are, and this is how we're going to use our stuff, and they just move forward. So it gets a little bit stagnant. And MHA, I think, deals with that problem very nicely.
hmm Yellow Flash asks, "What do you think about how B&H handles mantle swaps in comparison to Western comics?" I think it's more. It's not really a mantle that like um All Might is passing down to Deku because Deku has his own identity.
Mhm.
He's just inheriting the power. And even with that, the power's not exactly always the same as All Might's because he's still learning to develop it.
Yeah. And even within the power itself, the power is moving towards the singularity. The power
Mhm,
is designed to be passed on, so that there's a little bit of a nuance there. As far as mantle swaps, I'm okay. Well, let me put it this way: I'm okay with mantle swaps with two components to it. Number one, it has to be a mantle.
mhm.
Okay, Thor is a name; it's not a mantle.
Yeah, exactly.
When stuff like that happens, like it's mantle. No, it's not a mantle. That's the guy's name. Okay, so that's not a mantle. Um, uh, so when you're talking about passing, if it was like Black Panther as an example, that would be a mantle. Okay, Thor is not a mantle. The second one is you have to earn it.
Mhm,
There is no doubt in my mind that Deku earned um, accepting the one for all power.
mhm,
There's no doubt that I mean that you could not have found it back. Even though later on you know that All Might had somebody different in mind for accepting the
mhm,
power, but there's no doubt that Deku definitely earned that. So mantle swaps work when you earn it,
mhm.
and when the person that you're accepting the mantle from is out of the picture in that role. So All Might is no longer All Might. I mean, he's still around, but he's acting more sort of as a retired mentor, partly because
Yes.
he's given the power up and he can't use it anymore. I mean, he can briefly kind of bulk up and then he just goes right back down again. But if for a mantle swap to work, it has to be an actual. It actually has to be an actual passing. You can't
Right.
just say, well, now there's two Aquamen, or now there's three Flashes, or now there's five Batman, or seven, or however 20 Batman at this point. Um, the old Batman has to go away, or not necessarily disappear, but just step back from the role. If you
Right.
don't do that, then all you're doing is just you basically have a cheap copy, and that never works. So I think MHA uses that one example of a mantle swap very well because a he earned it, b the power is designed to be passed down, and c All Might steps back from the role to let Deku take the front stage. So in all respects, they handle the mantle role swap exactly the way it should be.
Right. Um,
Oh, by the way,
Yellow
if it wasn't
Spider-Man.
clear, I can't answer a question with a simple yes or no. It's just
Yeah.
it's not in my nature. I have to explain everything. So I'm sorry if I'm talking
It's
about.
okay. No, 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 that's fine. I mean, Yellow Spider-Man, and I'm sorry I called you Yellow Flash before, but he says, "I would say number 1 hero is a mantle. So from All Might to Endeavor." Do you agree on that? Yeah. I
Yeah, I guess. I mean, but is it really even a mantle? I think it's just
a
it's like a
position.
government numbering system.
Yeah.
So, I'm not even sure it means anything necessarily. Well, let me put it this way: you never see the students arguing about who's going to have that number one title. For the most part, they never really even talk about it, and I don't think anybody cares at this point because if you're kind of caught up on where the manga is right now, there's an all-out war going on. I don't think anybody
Mhm.
cares about that title. It's not like they're stopping bank robberies. Um, so I mean, yeah, but at the same time, it's sort of like it's more like getting elected to a position in
Yeah.
government. So I see it more as a job title than an actual mantle.
Right. And then the one who does inherit the number 1 position finds out there's a lot of responsibility with it that they weren't prepared for.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's more of a position in my opinion, just like you were saying. I don't think it was like a mantle. To me, a mantle would be like best example Wally West inheriting the Flash title from Barry when he dies in Infinity Crisis. And I'm sorry, Crisis on Infinity Earths. But I again like I see Deco, he's not really inheriting a mantle. He's just inheriting the power set.
Hmm. Yeah, there's a bit of a nuance there. So yeah, all right. Let's go back to that because you
Yeah.
mentioned Wally West and Barry Allen, and
Yes.
that's a good example of where a mantle passing works. The
Yes.
Flash is a mantle. You could look at it that way. I mean, as long as the powers make sense and people don't, and the public doesn't know the difference because he's wearing a mask, is Wally spent years as Kid Flash. And the way he got his powers is because he so admired the Flash that he basically, I'm summarizing grossly, please don't nitpick on the details, but basically he reproduced the experiment to acquire the power and then
Mhm.
became his sidekick. And then he eventually grew into it to become the Flash once Barry died. That is a circumstance where all those pieces line up. The kid earns it. He's the right. He's in the right position for the right job, and then the main hero steps back in that case because Barry Allen died. Now, the big mistake that I think that DC made is they brought Barry Allen back.
Mhm.
Okay, fine. You want to bring him back? There was no reason to bring him back. Now, I love Barry Allen because he was my first Flash, so I'm not complaining about Barry Allen per se. But that was the circumstance. Was now you have two Flashes running around. One has
Right.
blonde hair, red hair, and it's confusing. It's weird. It doesn't make sense. It was unnecessary.
Mhm.
But if you're talking about mantle swaps, that's a circumstance where the mantle swap actually made sense and was done properly. And so when you bring on all these other future state flashes, like the one that's got no legs and has the blade legs and impulses over here, and all these all these other flashes from the future over there, now it just starts to become noise and mess. That's not necessarily if people like that, that's fine, and some of the stories are actually fairly decent. But if you're looking at mantle swaps, that's a good one. Um, Dick Grayson he eventually became Nightwing, but there was a period, especially after Nightfall, where he became Batman, and that was
Mhm.
another circumstance where if he had stayed that way permanently, I think that would have been okay.
Yeah.
If Dick Grayson had because he earned it, because went through similar trauma, he worked hard, he earned it, he kind of worked his way up, and so when the character Bruce Wayne had to step back, Dick easily could have stepped in his place and taken over permanently, and I think most people would have been fine with that.
Yeah.
So you gotta mental swaps are okay as long as you do it the right way. And so we just trying to say, well, I'm the new Aquaman now, Jackson Hyde. No, you're not. Your run was awful. You didn't do anything to earn it. It doesn't make sense because Aquaman's still running around. I don't even know what you're doing anymore. So as long as you
Right.
handle it the right way, it can be done and it can work. And I think people will be accepting of it.
Right. And I think this also brings up another good point is consequences. I
Mhm,
think when it comes to consequences and death in Western comics, it doesn't always stick or it
mhm,
doesn't, there's no follow up to it. Where in manga such as My Hero Academia, it has an effect on the story going forward. Like Endeavor's choices affected his family.
mhm,
It also affected his persona when
mhm. Well, death is the absolute level on that plane. But you're right. I mean, everything has consequences. Endeavor is the way he is because of his partly because of his relationship with All Might, but that had a trickle down effect to Bakugo. Oh, I'm sorry,
Mhm.
to
Shoto.
Shoto. Um, so right, their actions have consequences, and when people die, for the most part in manga, depending on which one you're reading, they die. I mean, if you read Demon Slayer, for example, by the end of it, almost everybody's dead. By the end, almost everybody's dead. And but you don't. But it's not one of these things where like, oh, they're dead, but they'll be back in 6 issues or something like that. No, no, it's when people die, they die. That's it. That's the end of it. Or when they lose a limb or something like that, that's it. That's the end of it.
Mhm.
And so there's a kind of a lack of I don't want to say courage or something. I'm not even sure what you would call it, but when Marvel and DC, when somebody dies, they just don't stay dead. It's almost a joke. I mean, right now everybody's talking about the very strong hints that Alfred, who was killed during A Day in DC, is now going to be coming back probably pretty
Mhm.
soon. It's like, okay, I don't agree with the choice of killing him in the first place. I think it was kind of like a cheap stunt. But if you're gonna kill him and be done with it. I mean, there's so many characters that have died over time, and they just bring them back because they were popular, so let's do more with them. No, but they're dead. What? When you take away the consequence, it makes the storylines less meaningful. It's sort of almost you cheapen it. You almost feel
Mhm.
like it's inconsequential, like it doesn't make sense. It has no power, no ability, and people lose. I think over time, that's part of the attrition of the Western comic environment is when people do some bad things and do terrible. I mentioned Deathstroke earlier. Deathstroke has killed a lot of people.
Yeah.
He's killed a lot of people, and yet to start sort of treating him as an anti-hero is like, oh, he's okay now, or we think he might be okay. Harley Quinn's another perfect. Harley, when she was together with Joker, killed a lot of people. There's no, you don't get around that. Oh, no, she's silly Billy. Oh,
Like
she's now, she wants to be a hero now, so it's okay. She should be in jail,
yeah.
multiple life
Or
sentences in jail. And when you see comics over and over again that don't look at the consequences of the actions that they've taken, whether it's death, crime, killing, whatever else, I won't say you lose respect. I mean, you just lose the sense of gravity about whatever's happening. Like it doesn't matter. It's just we're just playing pretend, and everybody's pretend, and it doesn't matter. Manga, in particular, MHA, Black Clover is another one that I really enjoy. Uh, Emotion and gravity for days with Demon Slayer. When things happen, people feel the weight of those consequences. It affects them. You
mhm.
feel the emotion because consequences for themselves and the decisions they make and the other people around them affects them, and they carry that forward through the story, and that makes the story matter because they're treating
Yes.
characters like people. They're treating them like real people because that's how we work. When we make that bad decisions or bad decisions are inflicted upon us, we feel that and then we carry that with us. We remember those hurts and those traumas and those consequences and everything else. And we know what we know instinctively, kind of viscerally, how we are as people. And so when the manga takes that seriously and we follow that all the way through, that makes those characters, even though they're fictional, feel like real people, and that increases our
Mhm.
ability to relate them. But when you get into like DC and Marvel, when Ambush Book is running around Suicide Squad, and he's like, "Why is he here? What is going on? How does anybody relate to Ambush Bug? Please tell me." I mean, I know he's a kind of a quirky, interesting character, but how does anybody relate to Ambush Bug, and why are you inflicting him on the Suicide Squad? But yeah, manga treats characters seriously. They treat them like people, And
Yeah.
when you treat characters like people, the readers can relate more fully and emotionally invest in those characters, and that's why they're doing so well right now.
Right, and I don't think they just reserve that for, like, the main characters.
Yep.
There's also a lot of supporting characters who have a lot of development that you don't see anywhere else, like, what's her name? Uraka?
Yeah.
She has a completely different motivation than most of the people in the school for being there. She goes through some development with her powers.
Hmm.
And her relationship with the others, she wants to get up to that level, and we see that in the was it the competition they have at the school?
Hmm.
She realizes that she's just got to work harder.
Hmm.
She's not going right out there and kicking ass on the first go.
Yeah, I think her motivation was money, if I remember correctly, right?
To help her family, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, to help her family out. Yeah, and it was one of those situations where she has a power that on its face doesn't seem super offensive. It's like a
Mhm,
defensive or kind of like an in between supportive power. But then she learns again, just like everybody else. They take once that light bulb goes off, it's like, oh, for me to really do my best, not only just to help people, but also to be supportive of the people, my teammates, my classmates around me. I've got to get up to their level. I've got to
yes,
train. I've got to figure out how to progress. I've got to push myself to be the best I can be with whatever quirk that I have. And she's a good example where she's like, well, I want to be a hero so I can get a good salary, so I can have the money to support my family, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that motivation. But at the same time, when you consider what was ahead of them that they didn't know at the time, which is effectively all out war, she knew she had to step up.
mhm,
And when she saw that when her classmates were doing their best, especially during the sports competitions and when they were getting their provisional license and everything else, she couldn't be just like, I won't say half-assing it, but she just couldn't stay at her level and then expect to progress and expect to support her classmates who were already pushing to further and further levels. And that's another example of somebody who found the will to dig for a different reason. It wasn't to be like All Might or to beat Deku, who is my rival. If in the case of Bakugou, it was, well, I just want to support my family and just get a decent job. But at the same time, now I have these people around me who I care about,
mhm,
and I want to make sure that when we're in a fight with a villain, that I'm not the weak link.
right,
That I'm not somebody that they now have to be distracted by because they have to come help me because I'm not at their level. So she's finding ways to kind of support and uplift herself, being motivated to support and uplift the people that her teammates, her comrades in arms, and that's also another way of looking at it that's exceptional for that case.
okay. King KDI says, "It is not just that manga treat characters with respect by making them multifaceted, the way X-Men were or the Teen Titans," I guess he means used to be.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You can definitely see that with like the OG Teen Titans.
Mhm,
There's a lot of that in there. There's a lot of that. Maybe not as mature from an emotional standpoint, but in the early Teen Titans, there was they wanted to be part of the team. B, nobody in that team wanted to be the weak link. So
mhm,
they would kind of like they would make sure that they were, stayed as sharp as they could. And then C, they were all the original Teen Titans were just essentially was sidekicks of the main Justice League. So they always had that superior version of themselves to look up to and to want to strive for. I think
right.
the current Teen Titans just sort of lost that. They're just sort of basically they're junior Justice League, which is fine. I mean, if you like that, it's fine. But yeah, but at the same time, I think they've lost a lot of that drive. Um, you don't see the Teen Titans talking about. You don't see Robin. Okay, how can I be as good as and better than Batman? Jackson Hyde. How can I be as good as or better than Aquaman? You don't see those Donna Troy, all these other characters. I wish that we get back to more of that because in the OG Teen Titans was probably the best incarnation from my point of view.
Yeah, I miss the OG Teen Titans a
Mm.
lot. Now, there's another character, Tenya. He is got more of a family legacy that he's trying to live up to. He has a brother who's already out there as a superhero.
Mhm.
He's in the academy. He wants to make the family proud and achieve that goal, but some roadblocks get thrown in his way.
and the best class president you could ever imagine.
Yeah, yeah.
No, Tenya is the I guess you would call him the speedster of the group, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And yeah, there's definitely the I look up to my older brother mentality, so
Mhm.
that plays in big. The wanting to be, I won't say he's not the best class president because he wants to be in charge. It's just he's very much a let's play by the rules kind of guy
Yes.
to the extreme, and so
Mhm.
he's good at keeping everybody herded. So it's more like a den mother rather
Yeah.
than a boss. So
Yeah.
that works out very well. And then and then you also understand his level of commitment when he figures out how to make himself faster.
Mhm.
Because I'm gonna this one I'll spoil a little bit for everybody. So the his ability to run comes from these basically bioorganic engines that are in his legs and his calves in particular, and he figures out he can make himself faster, or I should say more endurance. Because when he runs fast, it burns hot like an engine. But he can make himself faster if he pulls the exhaust pipes out of his legs painfully and allows them to regrow. When they regrow, they come back tougher and stronger. It's sort of like training your fingernails or something like that. It's commitment in a different sense is that the his ability to improve and upgrade and level up involves actual almost physical torture. But he does it because he knows I have to keep up with my friends and I have to support them and I can't be a weak link. And this is what I got to go through to get there. This is what I'm going to do. And my brother did the same thing. And I respect my brother so much that if he could do it, I have to do it. Not to say that
Yeah.
I'm better than my brother, but understanding that he has to live up to his brother's legacy in a way. And that's actually a circumstance where I believe that that would be considered a mantle swap because
Mhm.
for a period of time he takes over for his brother when his brother is critically injured.
Right.
And so again, that's another circumstance where he's willing to work hard. He definitely earns it, and the mantle that he takes over from the character steps back. Now, in this case, it was against his own choice because he was injured. But yeah, that's a circumstance where again, it's another mantle swap, but it makes sense because all the pieces are there.
Right. As Yellow Spider-Man calls him, the human car engine.
Right, 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 right.
Now,
Drag racer. You call him drag racer.
there you go. That would another interesting character who's kind of like probably not as popular as some of the other ones, but I think she adds a lot to it. Is Asui? She's the frog girl.
Hmm. Yeah,
She has.
she's interesting.
Yeah, she is.
I mean, she's Toad from the Brotherhood of the Evil Mutants, right? She's kind of frog-ish, and her powers are frog-like. She's gonna stick to walls. She's got the long tongue, and then now she secretes kind of like this mucusy material that gives her, I think, camouflage powers at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I think she's interesting in that she's one of the few characters in the team that is mildly anthropomorphic.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody else just sort of looks like, except for Shotu's got the hair with the
Yeah.
scar, so you can kind of pick him out of a crowd. But she's the only one that sort of is froggy. There's two other characters. One is invisible. The other one looks like a pink demon with horns, but
Yeah.
that's something else altogether. We'll get to her in probably a little later. Um, but she's one of those characters where she's definitely odd looking, but you never see it get her down or off or out about that. She never goes into the pity. She never goes into say, well, I just kind of look weird and nobody looks. She steps right up with everybody else and say, this is the power set I have. I'm gonna use it best of my ability. You've got something involving water, I'm right there. You got something where you need a little camouflage, I'm right there. So she's actually one of the more inspiring characters because she, like a few of the characters that you see later on, is born where the quirk kind of physically manifests itself, maybe in not the best way.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, she's not that far off. It's not like she's like a hideous mutant. It's like monster or something like that. But
Right.
she's got the hands, and she's sort of like, she says ribbit a lot, and she's sort of slouched down and kind of got that down on her haunches and everything else. But she uses her quirk to the best of her ability, and it never becomes anything other than I'm here to be the best I can be and to support my classmates.
And the other
She's
thing I love
one of the more inspiring stories.
Yeah. And the other thing I love about her is her one-liners against Bakugou. She's
Yep.
the one who's not afraid to put Bakugou in his place.
Yep. And for some reason, he never really snaps back at her as hard as anybody else.
Right.
And I'm not sure what that means exactly. That might develop in the future. Who knows? But yeah, he never really like jumps down her throat when she snaps at him like that.
Yeah, no, he just kind of gets angry and then just sits down and shuts up. Now, another character is Minetta, he's pretty much the comic relief and a little controversial in a way.
And the pervert. He's the
Yeah,
pervert of the group,
he's the
right?
pervert.
He's the pervert. So for anybody in the chat who doesn't know Minetta, he's small. His costume for some reason looks like he's wearing a diaper. I'm not sure why.
I don't know if it's
Like,
supposed to be like a bowl and he's grapes.
maybe. But what he can do is he spawns these sort of purple sticky spheres out of his head, and he just picks them off, and then he can throw them, and it allows he can create traps, and he can do all kinds of things with that. It's a very strange quirk that I don't think we've seen the full potential of that quirk. So I'm waiting for the author to kind of figure out how he can use that quirk to something unique and surprising, as he has with other characters. But Minetta's definitely been controversial because he is a pervert.
Yeah.
In the sense that he's always trying to peek at the girls when they're bathing or whatever the case may be. There was some weird controversy not too long ago about his orientation or something, but I think that lasted all of 2 minutes.
Yeah, it was a mistranslation.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. Because he said, I think he said, yeah, I love you to Deku or Bakugou, one of them. And it was interpreted as love in the romantic sense rather than love as in, I love you because you're my friend. I respect you as one of my best friends. And it was weird how many people kind of got all upset about that. A, because of a mistranslation, and two, because he's a pervert. So that was somehow it was somehow interpreted as he loves this other guy, but he's a pervert at the same time. So what are you trying to say? And it's like, yeah, I'm glad that all only lasted 2 minutes because that was a stupid argument. But
yeah, it was. But
yeah.
The other thing about Minetta is he always seems to be like the first one who wants to run away, but then he will step up when it's absolutely necessary.
Yep. Yeah, I like that he's a pervert, but he's a little bit of a coward at the same time.
Yeah.
But when it counts, when it matters, he's there.
Yeah.
So if it was like a light, if it was light conflict or some kind of training, or there was a way for him to weasel out of it, he would probably take it half the time. But I think again that's another example of caring about the characters because they are relatable. And in Minetta's case, the reason he's relatable is because he is probably one of the more flawed characters.
Yes.
From a moral standpoint. He is a pervert. He's a bit of a weasel. He's a bit of a coward and all these other things. But when you need him, he's there.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what you can respect about him. And you sort of, I won't say you like his flaws, but you accept that he's flawed. He's imperfect. He's an imperfect hero. And so that in a way that kind of makes the group more well-rounded, because you don't have individuals that are all determined and perfect and doing all the right things. You have a mix. Some characters are more pure, hero pure than others, but they're all working together once they have that common cause. It makes it a sort of a motley crew, a crew of mutts, if you want to look at it that way, and that makes it more lovable, more endearing.
Yeah, and then speaking of a character we mentioned earlier, Mina, she's the one who's all pink.
Mm-hmm.
She is like the positive cheerleader, in my opinion, of the group.
Yep.
She's always pushing everybody forward.
Yeah, she's always positive, and which is an interesting dichotomy, because her power is all about secreting kind of toxic chemicals. So you would think the person who is most apt to not be touchable and huggable and lovable and everything else, who has a quirk, who is the exact opposite of that.
Mm-hmm.
She's a walking contradiction, and she's also of everybody in the class. She's the one that's most physically non-human. So in a way, she's sort of a Nightcrawler, if you want to think of it that way, from a Marvel mutant perspective. But she's always a cheerleader. She's always happy. And we've seen that there may be some kind of romance going on between her and Red Riot.
Oh, okay, yeah. Kirishima.
Yeah, the one who can turn his skin like rock hard. So that's kind of interesting as well. But again, it's another example of where you see characters. They're not all the same. They're not all on the same level. They don't all have the same abilities. but what binds them is a commonality of wanting to be heroes and wanting to be right and wanting to support their classmates and their teammates. And no matter what their power is, as long as they kind of have that core element about the personality of their character, that they all fit in, even, and they just look for creative ways to make their powers work for whatever it is that's going on.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And speaking of, Kirishima and also I think his name is Denki, the, like, Wi-Fi guy, the
yeah.
electric guy. They kinda become like Bakugo's, like, posse, even though he doesn't want them there. But, like you're saying, Kirishima with his body that he can turn to stone.
Hmm.
I think it is, it's stone. He's a really interesting character because, he also has his own idol.
He does, and he actually borrows his superhero name when you have to name yourself. He borrowed it from his idol because their powers were very similar. He named himself Red Riot, and I think his idol's name was something like
The
um,
red, something.
Red. You know, Red. Just Red. It was very similar. It was a very similar name. It wasn't exactly the same, but it was close. I forget the name off the top of my head. But
Mhm,
yeah, Red Riot is again another circumstance where you think, oh well, all he can do is make himself hard and just sit and just stand there and take hits.
mhm.
But what he learns to do is he learns to develop the power so that way it gets stronger, more durable, and then he can hit harder and stronger as time goes by. And so him um, and he's actually one of the guys who I would most attribute to being Bakugo's kind of like posse guy,
Mhm.
because he but at the same time he's not a sycophant. So he doesn't sit there and just
Yeah.
say yes Bakugo, whatever you say Bakugo,
Right.
everything you say. He's like he digs on Bakugo just as much, but at the same time he's also cheerleading for Bakugo at the same time, and he's one of the few people that actually does it, because he
Yeah.
sees that the power and the ability to kind of to dig in and to push, and he sees that in Bakugo, and he wants to encourage him to keep doing that more. Whereas some of the other people are like, Bakugo's so rude. He's like, come on, Bakugo, you can do it,
Yeah.
because because at the same time he respects the power that Bakugo is striving for, but he also knows that there's underneath the gruff exterior there's a good guy on the inside. And he
Yeah, and
and
it
then he personifies that himself. And he actually has more of a superhero arc, I think, than some of the other characters, especially when they
yes.
get to the point where they're trying to save the little girl with the horn coming out of her head
Yes.
from the gangster squad.
Yeah, and I also he also trusts Bakugo to be his, tutor, which
Yep.
is hilarious because knowing Bakugo's temper.
Yeah, I mean, but he'll take he takes the guidance and I won't say wisdom, but he takes the direction from the guy who probably respects just as much, or if not more, than anybody else in the group. Now, how he kind of came that way, I have to go back and dig
Yeah.
back up a little bit. I think it was just because he saw that level of strength and power, which is really core to what his ability is to manifest.
And I think also with Bakugo, not only with, Red Riot, but also with Denki, the electric guy, he kinda is a leader with them when they get into that one situation with the building.
Hmm.
He kinda guides them to do what he knows they can do best to get
Hmm.
them out of the situation.
I think
And
they're attracted to Bakugo's confidence.
yeah,
I think when they see that, even though his confidence kind of manifests itself in a sort of loud, bullying kind of way, they're attracted to that confidence because when they both started out, they didn't have the confidence in themselves.
right.
So they sort of glommed onto Bakugo's confidence to kind of make them feel they were sort of like trying to basically absorb some of his confidence by osmosis
Mhm.
to make themselves a little bit feel. Now, eventually, they sort of come into their own a little bit, and that works. But yeah, I think that helps a lot. That Bakugo is, even though maybe toxically confident, if that even makes sense, but they pick on that so much that if I stick with him, then there's nothing we
Yeah,
can't do together.
yeah. Then you have, Momo, who's kinda like second in charge to the class president. She
Mhm.
has a unique ability where she can create things out of her body.
Yeah, and that makes Minetta very happy, of course,
Yes, it does, it
because
makes
she has to
Minetta
shed a
very
lot of
happy.
skin to do it,
Yeah.
and she also has to eat a lot, if I remember correctly, to
Mhm.
to I think it's collagen or something like that. That was some kind of natural physical chemical that she has to use. That power is actually again another one of those circumstances where it feels on the get go initially it's a very supportive kind of power. just to
Mhm.
like, I can create a wrench or I can create a tent or something like that. And she uses those to create basically anything she can imagine. But here now it becomes a combination of twist, and also, which we're talking about just prior to with confidence, is her initial arc as developing as a character is she could create so many different things and do so many different um, so many constructs, kind of like a weird organic version of a Green Lantern, if you want to think of it that way. Is she had very little confidence in her ability to make decisions.
Mhm.
So she had a lot of struggle making strategic decisions when they were going through their testing. They're saying you have to beat me, or you have to beat this one, or you have to beat the other one, and she just couldn't. And I think that was sort of a weird manifestation of her power, where she could create so many things that she almost had too many options, and so she couldn't
Mhm.
decide. And so what she had to do is she had to learn to she had to develop the ability to be confident in her ability to make decisions, to come up with a strategic plan to kind of get them out of sticky spots. In one case, literally. Um, so I think that's also an interesting where her power seemed sort of benign and sort of like, oh, great, you can create anything. But at the same time, it sort of led to I don't want to say mental flaw, but it led to a mental weakness where she had
Mhm.
so many options she just couldn't decide what was the right one. And then so she lost confidence because she sees other people being decisive, she sees other heroes making decisions that kind of led to victory or led to success or whatever they were trying to do. And she's like, well, I can never be, because I don't have faith in my own ability to decide. I don't
Right.
have faith in my ability to make a plan, stick with it, and know that it's the right one. It was sort of this indecisive lack of confidence that really got to her, and she eventually learned how to grow out of that. Again, another character development where she evolved. She wasn't the
Mhm.
same person when she started than when she finished, or when not finished, but she's still going. But it's one of those situations where it wasn't just a power weakness; it was also a personality weakness, and she grew through that to become a better person, and that allows you to respect her even more.
Yeah, it's pretty much, I would say she's very book smart, but then when she was
Yep.
put into this scenario, she couldn't execute it. And
Hmm.
it is kinda interesting that Shoto is the one who kind of finally gets her to focus
Hmm.
and execute the plan.
Yep. Especially because the primary situation where that came up is they were going through another training exercise where they had to get past a senior hero to the finish line to kind of get to the end. But the Shodu knew that she had that ability, but she couldn't trust herself. And then when he got trapped, he's like, I believe in you to make that plan. You've got a plan. I know you have that plan in you. I've seen you make plans that work out. You've got to trust in yourself. You've got to believe in yourself. And then when she was allow her to kind of break through that a little bit, then it kind of worked out. So it was good that Shoto again, kind of, I won't say the senior hero on the team, but one of the more advanced, and kind of just from the outside, the one who looked like who was the most put together and the most complete hero right from the start, took on a bit of a mentor role, and that worked out for the better for everybody involved later on down the line.
Yeah. Another character everybody in the chat's hoping I get to is Tugada. Now, without any spoilers, it's gonna be hard,
Yeah.
but what I find interesting about him is his design. He's not drawn like all the other characters. Like, if you look at, like, it's almost like, oh god, the best example I can give is, like, almost like, um almost like a 1940s or 1950s animated style to him for some reason. Does that make sense? Like, with his,
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what I can say without spoiling it. Yes.
Yeah.
I think he's intentionally drawn differently. Partly because his power set is so unique, his quirk
Mhm.
is unique. Um, yeah, it's tough to say anything out without spoiling too much of that, because it's kind of
Yeah,
critical later on down the
he's
line.
he's a fun character, and he plays a big part in an arc.
Yes.
And
Uh,
I would recommend checking him out, and for
yep.
some reason, when I watch him in the anime, I keep hearing Ryan Reynolds' voice with him.
Yeah.
because he's
Okay.
quirky like that.
Yeah, I can see that. Let me see what I can say about that. Um, yeah, Brian Reynolds' voice would work. I think. Let's see, how far along. Can we even mention what his power set is without spoiling it too badly?
Well, we could just maybe
How
say the
about this?
basics.
He's hard to catch.
Yes.
How about this? He's hard to catch. uh, for a good reason. And actually, he addressed we again drawing parallels to Western Marvel mutant characters. There's a mutant character who's exactly like that, and he actually goes into more depth explaining how he's able to use his power better than the Marvel analog version. To be honest with you. Um, I want to say the Marvel Mutant version, but once you say that name, you know exactly what his power set is, and you don't want to spoil it. Yeah, so he's hard to catch. He's a senior student
Hmm.
and considered as top of his class because he's hard to catch. He's maximized his power, usually by keeping his clothes on, so that's helpful. Um, so that helps. But yeah, I think there is he was the student that's most like All Might
Hmm.
in terms of personality, and
Yes.
and that helps because what that did is up until that point, Deku was always looking at All Might as the goal of what he wanted to be, but All Might is so far advanced from where Deku started that it just you could see how it might eventually start to turn into looking like the unattainable goal. Tamada is halfway there. So it
Hmm.
looked like this is a milestone that's closer to what I could reach as far in terms of attitude and personality and wanting to do best by everybody and using your powers, no matter how strange they would be, without looking like I'm putting somebody off, or using the powers of my best of my ability, um, and making the most of it, even though it might seem like a strange power or a power that people don't get. And he definitely takes full advantage of that. Right, the big three. Somebody King
Hmm.
KDI, big three. That's exactly right. Um, yeah, so I think it was helpful to kind of insert a new character who comes in a little bit later down in the series that is an in between where Deku started and where All Might is. So it
Hmm.
gives somebody who's more closer to Deku's age that he could relate to, but who's still advanced enough that it gives him a goal that seemed a little bit more reachable. And I think that helped
Hmm.
out a lot from a just kind of making that journey seem not so far.
Yeah. And another character who has an interesting development, but we
But
can't spoil it.
before you move on,
Yeah.
Killmonger, it is not Mystique.
No,
It's definitely
it's
not
not
Mystique.
Mystique.
Yeah.
Somebody else said something that was much closer.
We got to look through the chat. Oh yeah, somebody does say it. I'm not going to say who. Somebody does say it.
Yeah. Somebody did say it.
Yeah.
Now another character in UA is, I think it's Yoama, the naval light
I think
laser guy.
it's Aoyama. Aoyama.
Oh, okay.
Naval gazer. I think is his power name. Basically, he shoots a laser out of his belly button, which is a strange power in and of itself.
Yeah.
And definitely not going to spoil this one, but he is super critical to everything that's happening in the current chapters of the manga. If you're up to
Hmm.
date on reading it, he's very sparkly. He's very flamboyant. So that
Yes.
controversy we were talking about earlier with Minetta, I think would have more aptly applied to Ayama. But yeah, that worked out pretty. Yeah, but he's a strange character. But he's got a lot of personality. His personality is very big, and I think he adds an interesting element to the group of sort of unintentional comic relief
Hmm.
sometimes. But at the same time, yeah, what we find out later is that he is super critical to everything that's going on right now with All for One. And so yeah, if you're interested in that and thinking that's just a throwaway character, no, that's again another circumstance where you take a character that you think is a throwaway character and do something very important with that character to make his presence more meaningful.
Yeah. So everyone means something in this manga.
Yeah.
Every little step means something. And the other thing with him is he's always speaking in a French accent.
Yeah, and I'm not sure why. I mean, honestly, I don't know. I don't know
I
why
thought
he's
at first maybe was he raised there, but it was never mentioned that. But he's always like, yeah.
or he's just saying like "oui oui" and "c'est bon" and everything else, and it's like you're in Japan, dude. I don't, and your name's Oyama. I don't know why you're. Now I guess suppose you could look French because he's very flamboyant and sparkly, but yeah, I don't understand why. But it's okay. You just go with it. It's a personality thing, right? He just likes French culture, I guess.
King
Naval laser.
KDI says navel laser. I have a feeling that was a take on navel gazing prima donna, but has a huge heart.
He does have a huge heart, and that heart is put to a test.
Yeah.
Put to a very serious test, and we find out that he actually has a lot more in common with, without spoiling it, he has more in common with Deku than people realize.
Hmm.
Yep.
And because we're going to have to wrap this up soon, the last character is also going to be kind of hard to talk about without trying to do any spoilers. That is a villain named Dobby.
Oh, Dobby. Dobby. If you've seen the anime or the or read the manga, but you're not up to speed, Dobby is the guy that is burnt over most of his body, and he connects the good part with the bad part with staples. And he has like a blue fire type power.
Yeah, and his quirk is very detrimental to his body.
Yes, if he overdoes it, it singes him and burns him and scars him. Um, yeah, Dobby turns out to be very critical later to several members of the hero side. He's definitely a powerhouse kind of villain. He's a very like an offensive power kind of villain. Yeah, no, not Dobby from Harry Potter. That's a very different kind of Dobby. That's a very different kind of Dobby. Yeah, he's an interesting character because again, he's another character where his quirk is not particularly strange or different or fascinating. It's fire, it's blue fire, but at the same time, his villain status comes from a place of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a question of something bad happened to me, but something bad happened to me, and now what's driving me as a villain is to, I guess, revenge, if you want to call it that, revenge against the people who he attributes to harming him. And some of those people are on the hero side of things. Again, I'm trying not to say too much because I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't read it. But yeah, that actually deals. That's probably one of the few circumstances where you have a character that's motivated by revenge.
Right,
Uh,
and I think he's also the only one in the group of villains who is not there for the main goal. He's just using them to achieve his own goal.
right. It is an allyship based upon mutual benefit. Right.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't care about All for One. I mean,
No,
or All for One's plans for Don. All he wants is if I stick with him, they will give me opportunities to take my revenge.
it's a means to an end.
Right. And
Yeah.
that's again another kind of where you can relate to the character. He's a villain. He's killed a lot of people. You're not going to say that he's a nice guy, but you can understand where he came from. That doesn't make it right, or it doesn't make him any less of a villain, or say, oh no, well he can turn into a good guy now. I don't know if that'll ever happen, but at the same time, it's one of those things where he's not villainous just for villainous sake.
Right.
He's not just like the mustache twirling two-dimensional character. He's a villain because things happen to him, and the way he chose to deal with those traumas is to lash out in a destructive way.
Exactly.
Yep. So,
well,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry. No, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it sounds like we're kind of coming to a close here. I think what was good to talk through with this is with that whole litany of characters, and I'm super thankful that I was able to remember half of them. It's good because there's a lot, why this manga is so memorable and has kind of had such the impact as it has is not because they have powers. Because if you're just looking for characters with powers, you can find that in any Western comic and an umpteen number of mangas that started off didn't work. It's what the work the creators put into to developing the people that are behind the powers, to making each one of these characters standalone, unique, with their own backstories and histories, and that's just not volume of stuff. It's backgrounds with emotion that develops
Mhm.
them as individuals, that they carry the consequences of their actions and the actions of others with them, and they use that to either go in a villainous path or a heroic path. And the creator's just done such a phenomenal job of saying, okay, now I'm a good person or a bad person based upon the emotional weight of my life experience. Now, how am I going to take these powers that I've been given and grow as an individual, as a person, but also push my powers to grow with them as well? And now we're going to use these powers in a greater context. In this case, of course, it's like war and conflict and everything else. I mean, it's just, there's nothing out of the Western comic arena that even comes close, in my opinion.
King KDI says, My Hero Academia could be described in 2 words: character driven.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, to be fair, though, there's still a very well put together story behind it. So it's
Yes.
very character driven, but the story is not weak by any stretch. Sure, they go on little tangents here and there once in a while, but every arc that they get in through
Mhm.
eventually gets you to a new place.
Mhm.
The arcs don't finish in the same place you started. The arcs always develop the characters, they develop the main plot, they develop the conflict to come. So even though I agree, yeah, it's probably a lot of it is character driven, the story is just as good as well.
Yeah, and everybody plays their part.
Hmm.
You don't have a lot of just background characters. Everybody plays a part in the different arcs.
Except for that hero that does the thing with the vacuum fingers in the
Oh,
spacesuit.
yeah, he's I forgot about him.
Kind of weird. He creates like a vacuum black hole with his fingers or something. Yeah, there are purposes for that, I'm sure, but
Yeah,
and yeah,
later on he could. I
he
feel
could
like
come
every
back.
character at some point does get their moment to shine in
And
this, and
again,
which is what's great.
MHA, another series where people die.
Yeah,
People die
and
and
it
they
stays
they
dead.
don't, yeah, they stay dead and they don't come back.
Well, I
So,
wanna thank you, Gabe, for coming on. I know
I'm
you gotta
happy to
get
be here.
going soon,
Yeah,
and I
thank
hope
you for having me.
everybody. No, thank you, and I hope you come back again sometime in the future.
Absolutely. I'm happy to come on anytime we can make the schedules work out.
Uh-huh. So, I wanna say bye to everybody. Thank you for coming. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and we will see you in the future. Bye.
Read more manga.
Read more manga. Yeah.